I introduce to you the Insignia Skirt, which is a self-drafted pattern. Today I will be showing you how I manipulated the basic skirt block, which I drafted in a previous video, into this good looking little number. Starting out, I had a few design requirements in mind, and I also wanted to use fabric that I already had in my stash. I found some inspiration in a few vintage patterns that I had at home. In the end, I settled on the following design elements to meet my prerequisites, while also taking into account the characteristics of my chosen fabric, which was a spun viscose. To conceal my tummy while adding comfort, I settled on a high waist with an elasticated waistband. Since my final design is quite simple, I decided to add a faux button-down button stand. The buttons add an interesting detail, which captures the eye while also adding a bit of texture to the skirt. Because my fabric was soft, flowy, and slightly clingy, I chose a drindle-like gather, which added to the soft drape and gave the skirt some fullness. This ensured that the end product does not reveal too much of that which I wanted to conceal by the design. To achieve the triangular silhouette I was looking for, the skirt was slightly flared. In the end, I opted for a ballerina-length, which falls between a midi and a maxi length. Because my fabric print is actually quite busy, I found it best to not add too many garment lines and details, except for the faux button stand. This also helps to create harmony in the design by making the final product a bit more aesthetically pleasing. The measurements you will need are very much the same as for your basic skirt block, so you should already have these. If you have already drafted your own basic skirt block, the only real measurement you will need will be the final skirt length, which you will measure from your knee to be able to lengthen your basic block. Material requirements for this project are as follows. For the pattern drafting and manipulation, you will need your basic skirt block, some drafting paper, a clutch pencil for accuracy, a drafting and grid ruler, a French curve, tracing wheel, your preferred fabric marking pen or pencil, as well as some spun bond or wet trace, to which you will transfer your final pattern for layout on your fashion fabric. To make your skirt, you will need your chosen fabric with matching thread, some fusible interfacing for the faux button stand, elastic, as well as some buttons. I found some ceramic buttons that are not only unique, but also machine washable, which tick my no special garment care box. Furthermore, you will need a sewing machine and an overlocker. Although an overlocker isn't essential, you can also use a zigzag stitch to neaten the seam edges. Machine sewing needles that are suited to your fabric type, an iron, some fabric shears, a nipper, hand sewing needles, and a hem guide. I made my own hem guide. Check out my double turned hem video to see how. I will first show you the pattern manipulations I used by drafting a quarter scale block. First, trace your basic blocks onto the pattern paper and extend your skirt to the chosen length. Remember to include all pattern markings. Cut out your lengthened basic skirt blocks. Start with the front pattern. Extend the center line of the dart to the hem. This will be your first slash line. Draft in a second slash line halfway between the first slash line and the side seam. Name your panels before separating the pattern on the slash lines. Draw in a vertical line to use as a guide before pasting down the center front piece. Now, extend the horizontal hip and knee line. These lines must be perpendicular to the center front. Determine the amount of excess or fullness you want to add to the skirt. Again, draw in a vertical line that runs perpendicular to the hip and knee line to add to the accuracy of the final pattern. Paste down by matching up all the guidelines and repeat with the last slash. Balance the waistline by connecting the spread out panels. Smooth out this line to once again be even from the center front to the side seam. Now to add some flare and balance the hemline. First connect the panels on the hem with a straight line. To add flare, extend the hemline with another 8 cm. Connect the waist to the flared hem by crossing the hip line and cutting off the basic skirt block hip curve. Balance the hem by placing your grid ruler at a right angle to your side seam and mark in towards your hemline. Use the French curve to soften the straight line. The modified front panel up to this point will be your front right panel. The button stand will now be added to the front left panel. You need not redo all the pattern manipulations up to this point, just add the button stand to this pattern. When transferring your patterns to the spun bond or vit trace, you can trace the panels separately. Now to add the faux button stand. Add 9 cm to the center front. Divide and mark the extended section as follows. Measure 1 cm from the original center front line. Divide the remaining section in half. You should now have 2 4 cm panels to form the rest of your button stand and button stand facing. Again, balance out the waist and hem lines, this time with a straight line from the center front. The section furthest from the original center front line can be marked with diagonal lines to indicate the faux button stand facing. The adjacent panel can once again be divided in half to determine the button placement. This line will also represent the center front once the garment has been sewn up. Now mark in your button placement. This will be determined by the size and number of buttons you wish to add. I find it easier to play around with the actual buttons or a similar sized substitute to determine my button placement. I decided on 8 buttons in total, which meant I had to space 7 buttons on my button stand with 1 button which we will add to our waistband later. For my pattern, the top button placement was 8 cm from the waistline, since I had to account for the 2 cm that I would add to the waistband button placement. All further buttons were spaced 10 cm apart from the top button. At last, it is time to add your pattern info and markings, as well as outline your final pattern. Remember, you will only add seam allowances to your final pattern after transferring it to some spun bond or vit trace. Also, trace the faux button stand, as you will need to cut a piece of fusible interfacing to add some structure and support. Now rinse and repeat this process with the back panel, omitting the faux button stand. The last pattern piece to draft will be the waistband. To determine the length of your waistband, measure the waist of your newly drafted front right panel as well as your back panel. Add these 2 measurements together, then double your answer. Now add 9 cm to this answer, as this is the width of your faux button stand. Measure out and mark in the length of your waistband on your pattern paper. I decided to draft my waistband pattern to be cut on fold. Next, decide on the width of your waistband. Double the finished garment waistband width, as it will be folded double to encase the elastic. Halve the pattern piece and add the relevant facing pattern markings. Now measure and mark in your faux button stand and button placement on the one side of your waistband. Mark in the cut on fold on the opposite side. Outline your final pattern and add the rest of your pattern markings and info. When you are done drafting, you should have the following pattern pieces: front left panel, front right panel, back panel, waistband, as well as 2 fusible interfacing pattern pieces for the faux button stand. Now would be the time to transfer your pattern pieces to some spun bond or vit trace. You will add seam allowances to these panels before cutting out to lay up on your fashion fabric. Now to draft the full scale blocks. I did not draft two separate front skirt panels on my full scale pattern. Instead, I folded my fabric in half to cut the two panels simultaneously, according to the front left panel, which includes the faux button stand. After cutting out the full panels, I unpinned my pattern from the fabric and folded the top fabric layer out of the way. I repinned my pattern by folding away only the 8 cm faux button stand, leaving a 1 cm seam allowance on my front right panel. I then cut the excess fabric away. To determine the amount of elastic you will need, measure out your full waist measurement minus 2 cm.
Ready, set, sew.
The next segment will outline the garment construction flow, but without any detailed demonstrations as to how each technique is applied. If you are unsure about any of the techniques used throughout the process, you can check out my videos detailing each individual technique. I have also included links in the description below. And as always, if you found this video helpful, please remember to like, comment and subscribe.